Do you ever wonder how great leaders in the community make things happen? When they encounter new, unexpected challenges like a pandemic, how do they continue to successfully make an impact? Welcome to That Sounds Terrific, the podcast that connects you with these amazing people. Get insights on what they do to meet their goals, find out how you can help them in their mission, and learn their methods so you can be more successful at what you do. Welcome to That Sounds Terrific with host Nick Koziol.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of That Sounds Terrific. Joining me today is Dr. Rhianna Rogers, and I'm your host, Nick Koziol. And I would love to give Dr. Rogers the opportunity to kind of introduce herself and tell us all the wonderful things that she's doing, because it's quite a list. And she was so nice to offer to introduce all the things that she's doing. So welcome to the show, Dr. Rogers.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm happy to be here. And yes, I am an eclectic person. I will start out by saying I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, so I'm a little bit of everything. My official title at SUNY Empire State College is Associate Professor of Interdisciplinary Studies, but I'm also the coordinator of the Global Indigenous Knowledge program at the college. Besides that, I wear an external hat that is called Sustainable Progress and Equality Collective, which is directly connected to a program I developed inside of Empire State College called the Buffalo Project. So we'll be talking about that probably today. I'm also have a hat in technology. So I am part of the SUNY system related to technological development. So I'm a fellow focusing on open educational resources, development of online digital engagement.
That's a lot of stuff going on in there, and I'm happy that we're going to unpack a lot of it today, or try to anyway. But I would like to start with you and kind of, you said it there, you didn't know what you wanted to be when you grew up. How did everything kind of play out? Can you talk a little bit about your career and kind of how you kind of got where you are?
Sure. So I always knew when I was young that I never wanted to be pigeonholed into a particular anything. If you would meet me in person, I don't like labels of any type. I don't personally like labels, and it's mainly because I'm a very multiracial person. So if you would know my background, I'm literally 12 different things. I speak 4 languages. My family is made up of people from all over. I'm actually originally from Los Angeles, so I have cousins who speak Japanese. I have cousins who speak different languages, and that's because it's all part of my uncles are from Japan and things like that. Mm-hmm. So culture has always been a big, huge part of me from the time that I was born. Being around people that were from different cultures mattered. And so from very young age, I knew that I wanted to be a professor. That's all I wanted to be from the age of 6. I knew that I wanted to be an archaeologist, which I actually have my doctorate in archaeology as well. But I also knew that I wanted to do lots of things. So my trajectory for my career, I changed majors as a bachelor student like 10 times because I wanted to do everything. I was one of those people that I think I have 165 credits at undergrad level because I was like, I'm going to study it all. Yeah. I ended up graduating with a degree in social sciences, but I had 3 minors because I just wanted to learn things and I wanted to get a better context. Without knowing it, I was really engaged in this kind of multi-dimensional studies. So when I went on to my master's degree, which I got a master's in history, I actually asked if I joined the program, if they would allow me to continue to work in other disciplines. That was the first thing I asked. So I continued to do archaeology, and my master's thesis at my college was the first that actually didn't have just history people sitting on it, because I did an interdisciplinary study of the Aztecs. That continued with me. So I looked for a doctoral program. It happened to be at my same institution. At the time, there were only about 4 or 5 in the country, interdisciplinary doctoral programs. Mm-hmm. And I decided to stay at my institution, so Florida Atlantic University. And I ended up studying the Maya, but my degree was really interesting because I was allowed to take credits in 4 different departments. And the focal point of my doctorate was the Maya, but I took classes that were history, linguistics, archaeology, anthropology. And then my dissertation, I actually had committee members that represented all 4 of those disciplines. So the reason I came to New York was I was finishing my PhD and I was already a professor. So I was a department chair in South Florida. I can tell you a little bit about that story too, but sure. I was attracted to Empire because of its interdisciplinarity. And it does not have traditional departments. It has areas of study. And so given my propensity to be everything and like everything, I was really attracted to the school, and I wanted to come to Empire because it was allowing that flexibility for me to work across different disciplines, to work with colleagues in different spaces, and to work with students who also might want to work in different spaces.
Right. So when we first connected, I really, one of the things that I really connected with was the fact that we both love to learn. So, and I kind of had, a somewhat similar path, but I arced through I went to Fredonia, and I arced through all the majors that they probably had, around the arts, and then finally settling into education. And then I never left college, up until, last year, really. I lived on campus for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And my passion was more along the lines of helping students get ready to, leave college and be holistically, trained to leave college and understand what life really is, mm-hmm. In addition to their academic study. So I think we're similar in some ways, but definitely different in others. And that's great. I loved learning about some of the things you're going to talk about right now in this episode on how you kind of crafted your path. And, I'd love to also touch on some of the things that you had to do a little differently, but not so differently during COVID with mm-hmm. the online learning and teaching, which became extremely important to everyone. So why don't we dive a little into, your passion and talk a little bit about, however this all started.
Sure. So I think I'll connect with the idea of the Buffalo Project. So this
Sure.
goes back to even what I was mentioning about my own trajectory. I am a little bit of everything culturally myself.
Right.
So I'm really interested in that idea of intersectionalities, the way that people are made up of so many interesting things. And I love exploring that in people, whether it be thinking about Buffalo culture, there's a sports culture, there's an mm-hmm. academic culture, there's a neighborhood culture, there's a food culture, there's an alcohol culture, there's all these cultures, right. And there's music, and these intersectionalities make up who people are and their identity. And I think sometimes people don't get to celebrate all of them, right? We get kind mm-hmm. of pigeonholed into focusing on one. So what I did with the Buffalo Project, and I'm going to bring this back, I was a professor Sure. in Florida before I became a professor in New York. And I started the Buffalo Project under a different name there at my college there, where I wanted to explore people's identities and kind of celebrate them in the college environment where I was. It was really successful. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm coming to Empire State College. Let's do this again. Let's figure out a way to make this happen. Now, Empire and New York are different. I'm not a New Yorker. I wasn't born or raised here. I had no connections to Buffalo before I came.
Right.
And so I actually took 6 months studying the culture of Buffalo when I still lived in Florida. I
Mm-hmm.
joined meetup groups in Florida to understand what people thought was important in Buffalo, because I was teaching about culture, and in order for me to truly engage with the culture, I needed to understand it. That's kind of an approach from anthropology, and I thought was really important. This led me to create a course which used to be called U.S. History through Ethnology. This was basically taking U.S. history, but rather than having it live in a book, it was talking about lived experiences of different cultures. Mm-hmm. We didn't have any exams, but basically what you had to do is you had to go interview people in a neighborhood that weren't your friends or your family. That was what was required. So Right. You had a midterm and a final. This became such an engaging project. I'm not joking. It was my most popular class from 2010 to 2012. There was all this data I was collecting about people's perceptions of each other, people's mm-hmm. understandings and not understandings, that I said, this is like a project.
Yeah.
I actually went through a full-blown IRB, Institutional Review Board, and I created a survey that was all of this informal data for 2 years. And I started spreading it across the entire campus. This has literally grown into today, not only being across Empire State College, but across the SUNY system. I just presented at the UN at the end of last year, talking about elements of the Buffalo Project as it's grown beyond just the system, but now internationally. But it all started with a course that was focused on asking students about how they felt. That has led to so many prongs of mm-hmm. work, whether it be research assistantships where students are developing their own surveys. I just had one that just came out right now. That was a student who was interested in netiquette and behaviors online. So I helped them develop that survey.
Cool.
Whether it be the development of a journal Sustainable Progress and Equality Collective, which is the external branch of the Buffalo Project, just produced its first journal called the Journal of Engaged Research, created by students.
That's
not
awesome.
created by me. They put the journal together. They created the articles. They were the content editors, talking about things that were relevant to them. Basically I say, you tell me what's important to you.
Right.
So, right now this journal just came out. You can imagine a lot of the stuff is about online learning, DEI, what's happening with, the pandemic, what's happening with kind of racialized disparities. All of this stuff is basically what is their focal point and what they're interested in. So it's been really interesting to watch. I mean, I would say I've been a facilitator of collecting things, but really it's been community working together to talk about these ideas.
Yeah. And what you're describing, if I'm understanding completely correctly, is that there's just so many things that so many directions you could go into in, an unlimited theses, of looking at, either, how one person interacts with another person and one culture interacts with another culture. And then it could be, and is totally different from another way that someone from a different background would interact. So the possibilities are sort of endless. And I think that that's great. The other thing that's absolutely terrific that I love is that you are engaging students to do that work, and it's a teaching moment the whole way there. Like they're learning more about their neighbors and learning more about not only what people think and what cultures think, but why they think it. And bridging that gap in the communication, is the first real step towards true understanding, right? Because part of, I think anyway, and you're more of an expert than I. Part of the reason that there's so much conflict, even nowadays, is that we just don't understand and take the time to look from other points of view of where people are coming from.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the development of intercultural competencies. So I'll tell you something of a project that I had, and I love creating open resources. I will share with you and your audience a lot of resources that I've created. But in 2017, I developed this Google platformed website for developing intercultural competencies, and I use it all the time and I share it with people. But one of the first things that we always focus on is reflection. And this is the issue that we have whenever we want to understand somebody else. You can't understand someone else until you understand yourself.
Right.
Because if you don't understand yourself, you're not going to understand how you're reacting to someone else. You're not going to understand the biases that you hold. You're not going to understand the assumptions that you have. And then you might start projecting things. And one of the things I always tell students, this is my favorite assignment that I give the very first day of class, is how do you know I'm Dr. Rhianna Rogers? How do you know? Have you looked me up? Have you actually checked anything I've done for? That's usually the first assignment I have them do. Investigate me, find out who I am, and then explain to me as the assignment, why am I qualified to teach this course? Then I have them do it with textbooks. Go find the author of the textbook or whatever resource we're reading. Read what they write about. Why are they qualified to talk about this subject? That interrogation of questioning and why and reflection, I really put at the forefront of the way that I teach, because we don't always do that in society. We don't always, it's really sad to think about this, but if you're thinking about, like, you go to a movie, I know we haven't in COVID, but if you go to a movie, you read a review before you go. But do you do that before you take a course, before you read a book, before you watch a television program?
Right.
We turn over that authority of truly understanding our needs many times, which makes it really difficult for us to develop those competencies to interact not only with ourselves and understand ourselves, but then that next level, which is engaging with someone else.
You brought me back to, honestly, in my mind, while you were speaking, I was thinking about a course that I took very early on in my college career in communications, which was like a 101 course. And there was a part of that where every year the professor picked a specific scene in a movie. All right. Ours was Nell. And there was a specific scene in that movie where we had to take that scene apart and really explain every part of that 35 seconds of what was the characters were going through, what they meant by what they were saying. And in this particular case, she couldn't speak English. She had her own language. And I go back to this one gentleman that, I don't even remember his name, but I remember his points that he was making. And the professor was saying, no, no, that's not right. Not right at all. Like, no, you're not getting it. But it doesn't really matter what the detail is. With what I was just getting from what you said is that student was looking at it from a totally different point of view from the professor. He was looking from a culturally different point of view, an experience different point of view. And so he was interpreting that scene as he saw it, and he was right. But also the professor was right. But where they were wrong is like in the communication about how they were right,
Correct.
So
yeah. So if I was teaching that class, I would encourage it. This is actually something I tell students. It doesn't matter what you think, it's can you prove it?
right.
If you want to convince me the sky is purple, get some evidence. I would love to hear that. I would love to hear that argument. I think one of the things about being really truly an effective professor is being humble. Like, and this is something I say all the time. Just as you mentioned earlier, I can learn as much from my students as they can learn from me. I build into my courses this idea of mutual reciprocity. And this actually comes from another hat that I've had in my life. I used to work in tribal politics in Florida. So I left academia and I worked there for a while. This also connects to the fact that I run the Global Indigenous Knowledge Certificate because I have a lot of connections to Indigenous cultures in myself and with my work. But part of Indigenous knowledge says this: knowledge is contained by knowledge keepers. It never denotes age, race, language. It says knowledge keepers. And so that means that any person has the ability to gain knowledge. You just have to be willing to learn it.
Right.
That permeates my teaching. I believe that every person comes in with experiences that are different than me, and they can enrich the learning environment if they're given voice.
Right.
It's when we don't give voice and we silence voices that we start to manipulate the learning process.
Right. And I think, again, what you bring up, of course, this is very important. Giving the students a voice. And I've taught in the past, and there's nothing worse than having a class of silence, right? So getting them engaged and talking about their own experiences and their own point of views, even after someone has shared their view, is important. And going back to some of the things that you said earlier about how interpretation of the facts, right? So this country and the world really is going through some big struggles around interpreting what's real, what's fake, what is a fact, right? Because everything gets twisted in a different way, and in a lot of ways, our young folks are growing up in a world where they anticipate or need instant satisfaction, right? So they instantly want the knowledge. So giving the advice that you gave just about courses and other things, do your research is the most important thing you can do nowadays. Where did that fact come from? Where did that person that tweeted or, gave that news item, even the newscasters themselves, where did they get that knowledge and what's their source? And prove, like you said, prove that it's correct. Prove that that's a fact. And then I just think that's such an important thing for our listeners to do, is that do your due diligence and look into the people that are teaching you and that you're learning from.
Yeah. And I would say it goes a little bit further, because I'll give you an idea about fact. I actually use the word data more than fact for this reason. Facts, like, we are right now on the East Coast and it's a particular time of day right now, but in China, it's a completely different time. Both are facts.
Right.
Both are facts. That kind of understanding of fact, that it can be different in different contexts, is why I always kind of focus on data. We have misinformation because people take fact as stagnant, as something that is permanent and that everyone believes. I would recommend to your listeners a free book that's online called Truth Decay, that was created by the RAND Corporation. They're a think tank, a very large one. It was written by Jennifer Kavanaugh and Michael Rich. But it lays out the last 200 years or so of how we've gotten to this point of misinformation and why it exists. And I really like this book because, number one, it's free and you can download it online. But also they have all this really rich history that pulls together data. It pulls together links to actual sources that you can look at. So it's not just you're taking a word from the authors. You're actually able to go back and interrogate the research yourself. That's something that I think that we need to be pushing more within kind of higher education, is this critical thinking, self-reflection, and the ability to understand your positionality and be humble about it, to know that even if you know a lot of information, you will never know it all.
Right. No, that I'm smiling because like that's exactly what I was trying to get out. And I'm like, I knew she would be able to explain it better than could get out in my mind. So that's awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about like, how you've, been implementing the Buffalo Project into the community? You said there's like, there's an internal university model, but then there's also an external, and how did that kind of really come about? And how do you get out there in the community and get it to work?
Sure. So the Buffalo Project is now 11 years old, and Sustainable Progress and Equality Collective, which we call SPEC, is a year old. It just had its year anniversary. So for the 11 years, basically, I already worked in the community, and I'll just kind of give you a couple of examples.
Sure.
We have, as I mentioned, a survey, and I have kind of focus groups where I'm constantly interrogating my population, the stakeholders. What is it that you want to learn? What is it that you need to know? And I've created different programs through partnerships that I've established. So one program that I have is called Virtual Residencies. This is one that was highlighted at the United Nations Geneva Forum. But basically what this is, and I'll give you an example. I have a grant that exists right now with a couple colleagues that's with the US Embassy in the Dominican Republic. And what we've done is we've created a 3-week micro-credential. The one that we had that was funded was around leadership in times of crisis. So these are like really timely topics. Yeah. And we basically brought together 300 students and 25 faculty for 3 weeks and 3 panels that were bilingual in Spanish and English to talk about comparatively what's going on with leadership in different contexts. So we had 5 countries represented, but the dominant country was the US and Dominican Republic. This is a perfect example. Like, we asked students, what do you want to learn about? How do we have leadership and deal with crises that we're going through right now? So I said, okay, let's put all together this network and bring people together. That's one way. So here's something that's really cool is we have students, imagine, that are in Buffalo, New York, that are talking to students in Prague, and they're talking to students in Dominican Republic, in Lebanon. And another one is Deliberative Conversations. So this is a really big project that I've been running for a few years as well. But I've partnered with external groups. So not only SUNY schools, even though I partner with a lot of them, but also schools that are in other places. So I actually had, representatives of Arizona State University, Wabash University, the Center for Mass Atrocity Prevention, a variety of organizations kind of came together, and we created a deliberative conversation, which is, and I'll explain what that means. It's basically, we choose topics that are difficult, and we put people that are from different perspectives in the room to talk about these topics, not just to have them argue, but to really understand the goal is, how do we find and heal? And what are the steps that we need to take that we can develop policy and write white papers or do some action at the end? And so it's really action-oriented kind of events. So we had 2 this semester. That one was how do we heal the nation? And it focused on how do we bring us back together after what happened on January 6th? I literally went out of my way to work with young Republicans and young Democrats, and I asked them to read my guiding document, because the goal is, if you really want to heal the nation, you have to get all perspectives involved. You can't choose a side. So, and then you bring them all to the table, and then you say, okay, there might be differences, but how do we figure out the baseline to make us work together? Yeah. So that's one way. Another one is food. I like food. So too. Before, it's good. Before the shutdown happened, I have a partnership with the West Side Bazaar, which if you haven't gone there, you should. But West Side Bazaar came in, and we did a kind of hybrid activity where I had students from Albania, the country of Albania, create a cooking show online. Awesome. I had food from the West Side Bazaar, and the executive director was explaining about advocacy in food in Western New York. And then some of the international colleagues were explaining about how food and advocacy relate. And then you had a whole bunch of people watching from around. So it's really hybrid-y ways that I like to do it. I try to bring broad audiences together. SPEC is doing that even bigger than what the Buffalo Project was doing. We're now working, that organization is not just in New York. I have people that are from all around the country now trying to figure out partnerships in other states to replicate.
Yeah.
So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I love the connection to food for a variety of reasons. One being that, like, when you think about when do a lot of discussions happen, it's around a table with food,
Mhm.
right? Whether it's a business meeting or family or whatever. And I feel like, if there could be benefits of COVID, okay, one of the benefits might be that at least the immediate family was having more time together and revisiting that family time around the table, right?
Mhm.
Because I can think of my own personal family and several other families that I know where, through the daily, speedy, crazy things that we call our lives, we don't always sit down and like have dinner together anymore.
Mhm.
So I love that approach because you're sort of connecting through food and experiencing new things at
Mhm.
the same time, both in conversation and hopefully in food. Like West Side Bazaar is awesome.
Yes.
And I have to like give kudos to Leadership Buffalo and Althea Larson, who was a former guest on our show. Part of her program is to bring everybody, all those leaders, through the West Side Bazaar, and actually through a variety of different culture and experience different types of food. I laughed because they sent me to a small restaurant that was Polish, and I'm Polish, so I'm like, oh, if I could have done anything else, I'm like, I loved the food; it was great, but I would have loved to kind of try something out different.
Yeah.
But that's such an innovative approach.
Well, one of the things before COVID, again, I used to bring every single Buffalo Project RA to a different restaurant in the neighborhood. That was required. You
Yeah,
would have to go to a different place, and it would expose you to stuff. So I teach in our international programs. I've lived abroad myself, and one of the things I always do is I will make food from the places that I come
hmm
from. So if you were in my house and you would hang out at my house, anytime I travel abroad, my friends would come over to my house and I would make a dish that I learned
from
abroad
there.
from that trip.
Yep,
I've introduced that to my students
that's
where I'm
great.
like, here is this food item. Let me explain it to you. Let me explain the cultural context of why it's important. And let's kind of discuss. And it makes them curious. And they're like, oh, I'm going to go find something else. And then they'll teach their family or their friends. So there's a lot you
That's
can learn through
awesome.
food.
Yeah, I mean, I know of a couple campuses that have the International Thanksgiving,
Mm-hmm.
and that program kind of started out just as a way to kind of expose students to the American Thanksgiving. But what I liked was like a couple of the colleges I worked at kind of twisted that around and said, everyone brings a dish to pass, and they talk about why this dish is important in their family and their traditions. So it's kind of a little bit of what you're saying. But I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would like to think that I have a pretty, complex palate where I love to enjoy new different types of dishes, and I'd like to introduce those to my family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But a lot of times I feel like, what, my family is one of those families where the kids barely eat the stuff that we think they like. One day they like it and one day they don't. So experimenting in that way is not always the best thing in our family, but I try.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was exposed to that because my dad was an international traveler as a kid, and he exposed me to a ton of things.
Right.
I will always remember this time that we were eating Thai food, and I thought I was eating a carrot, but it turned out to be like the hottest pepper of my life. I will never forget that. So, um, I have to tell you, I'm a very adventurous eater, just because in my world of being an archaeologist, I've lived abroad doing
Right.
projects in very remote places. So, I did a project for a few months in Ecuador in this village called Salango. And, we were commuting into the middle of like the forest, and like I had monkey brains. I'm not going to
Mhm.
encourage the eating it. It's not, I don't personally like it, but it was interesting. And it was something
Right.
that I explain in my classes, the delicacy of this, and it was like a big deal. So when I
Yeah.
explain the cultural context to my students, I'm like, listen, even if you might not like it, this is something about understanding different cultures. I ate a whole bunch of it. Like
Right.
I ate a whole bunch because it was something that they were sharing and it was part of their culture, even if it was something I didn't like, and I
Yeah.
said, I was really big on making sure that I was very appreciative, and I expressed to them how much I appreciated them sharing that part of their culture with me.
Right.
I haven't had it since,
Yeah.
but I will tell you that it's still one of the most meaningful sharing experiences that I had from a cultural group that had very little, and they were offering me all they had.
Right. Yeah, that's important to note. Like, these things that, you go to a different country, try to observe their traditions and their culture, because it goes back to what you were saying, research, like who knows, like, and I don't know that country very well, but if you were to refuse that, would that have been this huge insult where you would have been less welcomed to their community, right? Um, you know, I'm laughing because the other thing that has happened recently, we had some carpenter ants issue, and I was telling I was telling my kids, I'm like, some cultures eat ants, and they're like, gross, like they were
Mhm.
totally grossed out by that. And I'm like, because they were asking me, how can I take care of all these ants by my hand? It's because I'm like, I'm not afraid of bugs, for one thing, and also it's just a different perspective on things. I'm like, now am I gonna go cook up some ants for my kids? No, but I just want them to be open to the fact that there's protein and things like in other things that you wouldn't traditionally eat in America, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'll give you an example. One of my favorite, I lived in Mexico for a long time. So my dissertation and my master's thesis are based in Mexico. So I've spent the last 15 years going to the Yucatan Peninsula and Merida, which is the capital of the Yucatan state. I go there
mhm,
often. One of the biggest delicacies of Mexico is fried insects of various types.
right.
Um, they're delicious. And I have to tell you, it was an acquired taste. This is
Mhm,
like 15, 20 years later. When I first had it, I was like, this is not what I would like to do. But imagine after going somewhere, it's part of the everyday diet, it's part of what all your friends and colleagues are eating, it becomes normalized to you.
right.
And so like today, I miss fried crickets. Like I
Yeah.
miss them. I can't get fried crickets here.
Yeah.
But it's something that like if you would have talked to me when I was a child, when I didn't have these kind of open-minded cultural experiences where I was able to
hmm
step outside of my own context, I probably would have missed out on something that was really interesting and
Yeah.
I like now.
Yeah. And it's important also to note that, like, our cultures have grown up. I've grown up in a certain situation where this is normal and that's not normal,
Mm-hmm.
and again, to kind of do your research and learn about the culture, because to them it's not crazy, but a lot of the things that you do are crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So again, going back to like the Buffalo Project and what you're doing, I love that those gaps are sort of being bridged, and that you're including our young minds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to learn by doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, they're also going to start spreading that learning to other people, to kind of say, hey, you need to look at this from, the Vietnamese perspective, because this is
Mm-hmm.
what they believe, or the French perspective, because this is where they're coming from. So where do you see this project going? I know, like, the public facing project part is still relatively new.
Mm-hmm.
What are your hopes and dreams for that in the next 5 years? And how can some of our listeners and viewers help?
So, this sounds cheesy, and I say this to everybody. I want to make the world a better place. That is my goal. I won't
Mhm,
stop until I actually can do that. That's really what I want to do. So, my hope with SPEC is that we continue to create a pipeline for bringing up critical thinkers that will be change agents, whatever that means to them. Again, I am not a person who likes to dictate what that change will be or even the path that somebody is going.
mhm,
So I think for me, that would be that. I want people that come out of this experience and working with SPEC to be able to help their communities, to be able to share the insights that they learn in the organization. So the way that viewers and listeners can contribute, sharing with me information about people who could be research associates,
mhm,
people who want to be going through this program. I mean, as it stands right now, we have different ways of engaging in the research associate position. You can get college credit through Empire State College. There are a few paid internships. There are a few unpaid internships, and it's open to everyone. And what I mean by open to everyone is the youngest person that we have that's been affiliated is in high school. The oldest person we have that's affiliated is 65,
mhm.
going through the RA-ship. It's not about age, as I mentioned earlier. It's about understanding and wanting to make a change to help others around you. And you can do that at any age. You can do that at any walk of life. So I
Well, it
would
adds to the
say
project too, right? Like, the
it does.
difference in age, the difference in perspective is just one more, like, variable to study, right?
Yeah. Well, think about this. Most internships focus on like traditional college age students. I
Mhm,
actually brought this up because I ran an internship with the Rockefeller Institute of Government, and I opened the internship up to different age groups. And I said, think about this. When students are graduating from college, they're not going to join a company that is 25 to 26 years old and that's the only people in the company. They're going to join a company that is a variety of ages. How are they going to learn how to navigate that if they've never been exposed to working with people from different age groups? How?
Yeah.
If you're not providing that opportunity. And they were like, oh, and I said, yeah. So that's one of the reasons I really like this, is that you will work with people from different generations. You will work with people from different cultures. And the more you can learn about that in a safe space where it's not high stakes, right? Where you get fired or something like that for making a mistake. I think it's a really great opportunity because you can learn.
Yeah, I mean, every person has something to contribute, and I love the openness, and we talk about adult learning in society and how hard it is to go back. But if you had more opportunities to do more hands-on, holistic learning and internships, I think that you'd have more people willing to do it. You're sort of doing that work anyway when you volunteer for different organizations, but it's not that far of a stone's throw to offer internships at a company, because you're getting more, knowledge from the older people as far as like their life experiences, but then the same thing with the younger kids. I love that there's a high school student involved. That's great.
Yeah. So he actually wrote an article inside of the Journal of Engaged Research. So
very nice.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to make sure we put the link for that also on our show notes. And, the next part of the show, I just want to make sure that I've caught everything that you wanted to share with the audience, because I have a feeling like you're the type of guest that I could bring back 5 or 6 times and we'd still have a million things to talk about. But is there anything that you definitely want to get it across to our That Sounds Terrific audience that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, I think just for everybody out there, my hope would be, be curious. It's something that's important about where we are as society and culture is, some things can be uncomfortable, but if you pause and you reflect on what things you like, you can put yourself in a position to think that somebody might like something equally as much as you do on the opposite side of the coin. And if you remember that, it'll make you think about questioning, what do you like, and asking more questions than making assumptions. If we do that, if we start asking each other questions, we can start to learn about each other, and we can start working together to make, the future brighter for everyone.
Right. That's terrific advice. And honestly, you opened my mind to a bunch of different things, even for the second time talking to you. And I'm hoping we're going to stay in touch, and so I can continue to learn more. And I think that all our listeners and viewers should take that advice, stay open, and really then learn from each other, but learn about yourself. That was another important point that I want to hammer home, is that you have to know, again, what you said, you have to know yourself in order to be able to learn and know others. So, Dr. Rogers, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I really appreciate it. And we will be sure to put all your contact information in our show notes and follow you on everywhere we can, right?
Yes.
So thank you again, Dr. Rogers.
Yes, it was a pleasure being here, and thank you.
Thank you for joining us in another episode of That Sounds Terrific. Don't forget to check out the show notes and our website at thatsoundsterrific.com to find the contact information and the best ways to volunteer with the organizations that we feature. If you know someone that is doing terrific things and think they should be featured in a future episode, be sure to email us their name, contact info, and short description of what they're doing at thatsoundsterrific@gmail.com. If you like our show, give us a 5-star rating and give us some social media love by liking our Facebook page, That Sounds Terrific. Follow us on Twitter at Sounds Terrific 2 and Instagram at Sounds Terrific. We love hearing your feedback on how to make our show sound even more terrific. Till next time.